Black elderly woman kicked out of car dealership. Next day, her billionaire son's Rolls-Royce arrives. Why did they kick this quiet grandmother out of a car dealership? They'll regret it when her billionaire son arrives for payback. But the real shock isn't the Rolls-Royce, it's her hidden past as a brilliant intelligence analyst targeting the owner's stunningly corrupt criminal enterprise. Subscribe, like, and listen now to hear how this incredible story unfolds. The air inside Langley Luxury Autos hummed with conditioned coolness and the scent of expensive leather, a stark contrast to the humid Atlanta afternoon Vivian Harris had just walked in from. At 68, her silver hair neatly coiffed, her movements careful but deliberate, she clutched her purse containing a cashier's check, the culmination of years of careful saving, earmarked for a reliable sedan for her grandson's college graduation. She paused, admiring a sleek, dark gray model, its lines elegant and understated. Her fingers, marked by age but still graceful, tentatively reached out to trace the cool metal of the door. "Can I help you?" The voice was smooth but laced with impatience. A young salesman, impeccably dressed, eyed her sensible shoes and modest floral dress with barely concealed disdain. Before Vivian could reply, another voice cut through the showroom's quiet reverence. "I think you're looking for the used car lot down the street, madam. Or perhaps the bus stop." Edward Langley, the dealership's owner, emerged from his glass-walled office, radiating smug entitlement. He appraised Vivian head to toe, a smirk playing on his lips. "We cater to a certain clientele here." Vivian drew herself up, her spine straightening almost imperceptibly. "I assure you, I am quite serious about purchasing." "Security," Langley snapped, gesturing dismissively towards Vivian without even looking directly at her. "Show this woman the way out." The young salesman, taking his cue, stepped forward, placing a hand firmly on Vivian's arm. "If you'll come this way." He steered her firmly towards the gleaming glass doors. Caught off balance by the suddenness and the subtle force, Vivian stumbled slightly as she exited onto the hot pavement. She righted herself quickly, adjusting her dress, her face composed, but her eyes, when she glanced back at the dealership, held a spark of glacial fury. Langley watched from the window, laughing with the salesman. Vivian turned and walked away, her steps measured, head held high. A quiet whisper escaped her lips, lost in the traffic noise, but carrying the weight of icy resolve. "You will regret this." Vivian Harris lived a life defined by quiet dignity and routine in a modest but well-kept bungalow in Atlanta's historic West End. To her neighbors, church members, and the generations of students she had taught history to before retiring, she was Mrs. Harris, knowledgeable, kind, perhaps a bit reserved, a pillar of the community. Her days were filled with tending her small garden, volunteering at the local library, attending church services, and doting on her grandson, Michael. Her pride and joy, however, was her son, Daniel Hayes. Daniel, now 42, was the founder and CEO of DH Innovations, a wildly successful tech company headquartered in Atlanta. He was a certified billionaire, his face occasionally gracing the covers of business magazines. Vivian adored him, immensely proud of his accomplishments, though their lives existed in different orbits. His world was venture capital, algorithms, and global expansion. Hers was neighborhood watch meetings and baking sweet potato pies. Daniel, in turn, revered his mother, ensuring she wanted for nothing financially, calling her weekly, visiting when his demanding schedule allowed. Yet, perhaps he saw her primarily through the lens of maternal devotion, the loving, steadfast, slightly old-fashioned woman who had raised him alone after his father's tragic death. The official story of Robert Harris's death, the one Vivian shared and Daniel grew up with, was that he died in a sudden industrial accident while working on an overseas engineering project decades ago. The truth, buried deep beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy, was far more complex. Before becoming Mrs. Harris, the history teacher, Vivian had possessed a different skill set. She held degrees in international relations and economics, and, in her youth, worked as a civilian intelligence analyst for a specialized branch of the State Department focused on tracking illicit international finance and its links to arms trafficking. Her husband, Robert, worked in a related, more covert field. His disappearance wasn't an accident. He vanished during an operation targeting a powerful network involved in exactly the kind of activities Vivian used to analyze. Devastated and fearing for Daniel's safety, Vivian had resigned, scrubbed her professional history, moved to Atlanta, and dedicated herself to raising her son in absolute anonymity, burying her analytical mind beneath lesson plans and PDA meetings. She had chosen safety, normalcy, obscurity. Atlanta pulsed with energy, a city of stark contrasts, gleaming corporate towers downtown, sprawling suburbs, historic neighborhoods like Vivian's, and pockets of flashy new wealth where establishments like Langley Luxury Autos thrived. Edward Langley represented that flashy element, relatively new money, ostentatious displays of success, and a reputation for sharp, sometimes questionable, business practices. Vivian knew the type. She'd analyzed similar profiles long ago, individuals who used legitimate businesses to cloak other activities. She hadn't thought about that world in decades, content in her quiet retirement, her sharp mind occupied by historical texts rather than complex financial data. Her life was deliberately ordinary, insulated from the dangers she knew existed just beneath the surface. Until Edward Langley's casual cruelty ripped through the carefully woven fabric of her peaceful existence. The reason for Vivian's visit to Langley Luxury Autos was simple. Her grandson, Michael, was graduating from Georgia Tech with honors, and she wanted to give him the gift of reliable transportation. She had diligently saved for years, adding small amounts from her pension and Social Security, wanting to buy him a solid, safe, nearly new sedan, outright a symbol of her pride and a practical help as he started his career. She had researched dealerships known for quality pre-owned vehicles, and Langley's, despite its high-end focus, also advertised a certified pre-owned section. Carrying the cashier's check, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The encounter unfolded with brutal swiftness. Langley's dismissive sneer, the salesman's condescending tone, the assumption that her age, race, and modest appearance automatically disqualified her from being a serious customer, it was a stinging cocktail of prejudice. Being physically ushered out, stumbling on the pavement, was a profound humiliation. Vivian wasn't fragile, but the blatant disrespect struck a deep chord. It wasn't just about her. It was about the principle, the casual cruelty based on assumptions. She walked home slowly, the afternoon sun feeling harsh. Her initial reaction wasn't overt anger, but a cold, settling fury. The analytical part of her brain, dormant for decades, began to stir. Langley's arrogance felt excessive, almost performative. Why be so aggressively dismissive? What was he protecting? Old habits died hard. She found herself observing details she hadn't consciously registered: the overly watchful security guard near the service bay, the hushed, tense conversation Langley was having on his phone just before he noticed her, the specific model of expensive watch he wore, often favored by a certain type of international clientele she recalled from her analyst days. That evening, she called Daniel. She recounted the incident calmly, objectively, downplaying the physical jostling and her stumble, focusing on the dismissive treatment and Langley's attitude. She didn't ask Daniel to intervene. Sharing the story was her way of processing, perhaps seeking validation that her indignation was justified. Daniel's reaction, however, was anything but calm. Hearing the carefully controlled hurt beneath his mother's measured words ignited a protective fury in him. His mother, the kindest, most dignified person he knew, treated like refuse? Humiliated? Unacceptable. His mind immediately leaped to action. Apologies wouldn't suffice. Langley needed to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Power needed to confront arrogance. His initial goal was visceral: defend his mother's honor, make Langley accountable, and ensure he groveled. The idea formed quickly a display of overwhelming financial power, a direct refutation of the prejudice his mother faced. He would show Langley exactly who he had insulted. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice tight with controlled anger after hearing her story. "Tomorrow morning. Wear that navy dress I like. We're paying Mr. Langley another visit." Vivian hesitated for only a moment. While Daniel planned his dramatic confrontation, her own mind was working on a different track. Langley's face, his behavior. Something fell off, triggering a faint echo from her past. Her initial goal began subtly shifting from seeking personal redress to satisfying a reawakened professional curiosity. She agreed to go with Daniel, partly to support his need to defend her, but also because she wanted another look at Edward Langley and his operation. The arrival of the gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom the next morning caused precisely the stir Daniel intended. Heads turned on the street. Employees inside Langley Luxury Autos stared, momentarily forgetting their tasks. The chauffeur opened the door, and Daniel Hayes stepped out, radiating controlled fury and billionaire confidence. Moments later, Vivian emerged from the other side, poised and elegant in her navy dress, her expression unreadable. They swept into the showroom, the atmosphere instantly charged. Langley, alerted by his staff, hurried out his office, his earlier smirk replaced by confusion, then dawning panic as he recognized the face of Atlanta's most prominent tech mogul. "Mr. Hayes, what an unexpected honor," Langley stammered, extending a hand that Daniel ignored. "Yesterday, you insulted my mother," Daniel stated, his voice dangerously quiet but carrying across the showroom. "You presumed she couldn't afford to be here. Today, I'm here to discuss purchasing this entire dealership. Just to prove a point." Langley blanched, sputtering denials and apologies. "A misunderstanding. Please, allow me to apologize profusely to your mother." "Apologize," Daniel commanded, gesturing towards Vivian. Langley turned to Vivian, his face slick with sweat. "Mrs. Harris," he began, his voice lacking sincerity. "My deepest apologies for the confusion yesterday. A terrible mistake." Vivian met his gaze coolly. "Confusion, Mr. Langley? Or judgment?" Before Langley could respond, her eyes subtly scanned his office through the glass wall behind him. She noted the specific brand of high-security shredder in the corner, the unusual number of monitors displaying complex data streams, not just inventory. And then she saw a small, abstract sculpture on his desk, a distinctive piece by a niche European artist known to be favored by a certain circle of shadowy financiers she used to track. It was a tiny detail, meaningless to anyone else, but to Vivian, it was a blaring red flag. Daniel, satisfied with Langley's public humiliation but uninterested in his insincere apology, cut him off. "We're leaving," he announced curtly, guiding Vivian towards the door. "But rest assured, Mr. Langley, I will be looking into your operations." Back in the Rolls-Royce, Daniel was still simmering, discussing options with his legal team over the phone lawsuits, public relations campaigns. Vivian, however, was quiet, processing the visual cues from Langley's office. The sculpture, the tech, Langley's barely masked tension beneath the panic. It resonated with patterns she hadn't thought about in 30 years. "Daniel," she said carefully, interrupting his call. "Forget lawsuits. There might be more to Mr. Langley than just arrogance." She didn't elaborate further, not yet ready to exhume her buried past. But she asked him, "Your company. You have people who investigate corporate security, financial backgrounds?" Intrigued by her tone, Daniel confirmed DH Innovations had a top-tier corporate intelligence unit. "Why, Mom?" "Indulge me," Vivian requested. "Have them run a deep background check on Edward Langley and his primary holding companies. Look for shell corporations, unusual international transactions, anything that seems disproportionate for a luxury car dealership, even a successful one." Daniel, trusting his mother's sharp intellect, even if he didn't understand her angle, agreed immediately and relayed the instructions. While Daniel's team launched their official corporate investigation, Vivian began her own, quieter probe. She reactivated dormant skills, using public records databases, obscure online forums, and encrypted messaging to contact Eleanor Vance, her former colleague and friend from the State Department, now a retired financial crimes consultant living in D.C. Vivian didn't reveal the whole situation, just asked Eleanor general questions about current trends in money laundering through luxury goods, mentioning the sculpture artist's name and asking if any particular networks favored that artist. Eleanor's encrypted reply came a few days later. It was cautious but confirmed Vivian's suspicions. The artist was linked to a network specializing in laundering money for international arms dealers, a network with roots stretching back decades, possibly connected to the very groups Vivian and Robert had investigated. Eleanor also provided a few recently flagged names and shell corporations associated with this modern iteration of the network. Complication: Daniel's team hit roadblocks. Langley's finances were complex, shielded by layers of offshore accounts and trusts. They found red flags, but nothing illegal on the surface. Langley, clearly spooked by Daniel's threat, seemed to be tightening his digital security. Obstacle: Vivian realized that exposing Langley would require more than standard corporate intelligence. It needed her specialized knowledge of how these particular networks operated, how they hid their tracks. The stakes were suddenly immense. This wasn't just about defending her honor anymore. It was about Langley's potential connection to dangerous international crime, possibly even to the circumstances surrounding Robert's disappearance. The convergence of information Daniel's team hitting sophisticated financial firewalls and Eleanor Vance's confirmation of the artist's link to a potentially resurrected criminal network created a tense stalemate. Daniel was frustrated, his usual methods proving insufficient. Vivian felt a growing unease, the shadows of her past looming larger. She knew Langley wasn't just a fraud. He was likely a player in a dangerous game with deep historical roots. The turning point arrived unexpectedly through Vivian's quiet community connections. While volunteering at the library, she overheard two young men discussing their recent, abrupt layoff from Langley Luxury Autos. They weren't salespeople, but worked in the back office, handling detailed vehicle import-export documentation. Vivian, her instincts humming, engaged them in polite conversation. Expressing sympathy, she gently probed about their work. One of the young men, bitter about the dismissal, let slip fragments about weird shipping manifests, cars listed as exported to obscure shell companies in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands, and Langley's insistence on using a specific, highly encrypted accounting software he'd always found overkill for a car dealership. That evening, Vivian sat Daniel down in the quiet living room of her bungalow. "Daniel," she began, her voice low but steady, There's something I need to tell you about my work before you were born, and about your father." For the next hour, Vivian carefully unveiled a sanitized version of her past. She explained her role as a government intelligence analyst specializing in tracking illicit international finance, particularly funds linked to arms trafficking. She spoke of Robert's related work in a different, unnamed agency. She revealed that the network they were investigating decades ago had tendrils reaching into legitimate businesses, using them as fronts. She explained her deep suspicion that Edward Langley was not just a corrupt businessman, but a modern node in a network potentially connected to the one that cost Robert his life. She shared what she'd learned from Eleanor and the fired employees, highlighting the specific software and destinations as classic indicators of sophisticated money laundering operations. Daniel listened, stunned into silence. His mother, the history teacher, the church volunteer, had been an intelligence analyst hunting international criminals. His father hadn't died in a simple accident. The revelations reconfigured his entire understanding of his parents, his childhood, his mother's quiet strength. Shock quickly gave way to a dawning understanding her sharp mind, her reserved nature, her unwavering moral compass. It all clicked into place. And then came anger not at her secrecy, but the forces that had shaped her life, taken his father, and now threatened her again through Langley. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "To protect you," Vivian said simply. "After Robert disappeared, I wanted you to have a normal, safe life away from that world. I buried it. Until Langley." This raw, honest conversation was the midpoint. It fundamentally changed their relationship and the nature of their goal. Daniel now understood the true stakes, far beyond a personal insult or corporate espionage. Vivian, by revealing her past, had crossed her own point of no return, bringing the dangerous world she'd fled back into focus. Their mission crystallized: expose Langley's criminal enterprise, uncover its full extent, and find any possible connection to Robert Harris's disappearance. They were no longer just mother and son seeking retribution. They were partners, combining Vivian's unique analytical skills and historical knowledge with Daniel's vast resources and modern technological power. The fight was now deeply personal, professional, and rooted in decades of unresolved history. The revelation forged a powerful new dynamic between Vivian and Daniel. He viewed her not just with love, but with awe and fierce protectiveness. She, in turn, allowed herself to lean on his resources, guiding their combined efforts with the strategic precision honed decades ago. Their first step was to regroup and refine the investigation based on Vivian's expertise. She explained that networks like Langley's relied on compartmentalization and complex digital trails. Standard corporate PIs wouldn't suffice. Daniel, through DH Innovations' extensive network, discreetly contracted a specialized cybersecurity firm and a team of forensic accountants known for handling international financial crime cases, firms usually retained by governments or major banks. Vivian worked closely, remotely, with these specialists. She didn't need a basement command center. Her weapons were her laptop, encrypted communication channels, and her deep understanding of criminal methodology. She guided the forensic accountants, pointing them towards specific types of transactions, jurisdictions, and software vulnerabilities often exploited by these networks, based on historical patterns updated with Eleanor Vance's insights on modern techniques. She helped the cyber team understand the logic behind the sophisticated encryption Langley used, suggesting potential analytical approaches rather than brute force hacking. Progress was slow but steady. The forensic accountants began untangling the web of shell corporations, confirming payments flowing through Cyprus and the Caymans, linking them to holding companies previously associated with arms dealers flagged by international watchdogs. The cyber team, guided by Vivian's insights, found subtle anomalies in the dealership's encrypted traffic, suggesting communication with secure servers in known havens for illicit finance. They couldn't crack the core encryption yet, but they were mapping the network's digital footprint. Meanwhile, Vivian focused on the human element. She believed Langley, under pressure, might make a mistake. Remembering the disgruntled former employees, she suggested Daniel's team discreetly reach out again, not with vague questions, but with specific inquiries based on the accountant's findings, e.g., did you ever process wire instructions involving this specific Cypriot bank? This targeted approach yielded results. One of the fired clerks, when presented with specific transaction codes, nervously admitted he'd been instructed by Langley to misclassify certain international transfers, feeling uneasy about it, but needing the job. He agreed to provide a confidential affidavit. This was their first piece of direct internal evidence. Daniel handled the pressure on his end. Langley, perhaps sensing the focused investigation, attempted subtle retaliation. A negative story about DH Innovation's labor practices appeared on an obscure financial blog. A permit for one of Daniel's major downtown projects faced unexpected delays. Daniel recognized these as likely instigated by Langley or his associates, and countered them swiftly through his corporate comms and legal teams, refusing to be intimidated. Internal conflict. Vivian wrestled with the ghosts of her past. Every piece of data linking Langley to arms financing brought back the pain of Robert's loss and the fear she'd lived with. Was she putting Daniel in danger? Was reopening this wound worth the risk? Daniel, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile the mother he knew with the brilliant analyst guiding this complex operation. He worried about her safety, urging her to let his security team handle everything, but respected her need to be involved. Their strategy coalesced. Gather irrefutable evidence of money laundering connecting Langley directly to the international network, provided to the highest levels of federal law enforcement, perhaps an FBI task force specializing in transnational crime, identified via Eleanor or Vivian's old contacts, and ensure Langley couldn't escape. They needed that one final piece of proof, the smoking gun, before Langley bolted. The pressure intensified on all fronts. Daniel's legal team successfully blocked Langley's attempts to obstruct the investigation through business channels. But the message was clear. Langley knew he was being targeted and wouldn't go down quietly. Vivian received an anonymous, vaguely threatening email hinting that digging into the past can be unhealthy, traced by Daniel's cyber team to a burner account, but almost certainly originating from Langley's camp. Security around both Vivian and Daniel was tightened significantly. The breakthrough came from the cybersecurity team. Working with Vivian's analysis of Langley's likely communication protocols, based on old network methods updated for modern tech, they identified a narrow window during the dealership's nightly data backup to a secure offshore server when specific encryption keys were briefly vulnerable. They couldn't access the content, but they could potentially intercept metadata logs showing the size, frequency, and destination of data packets being transferred. This metadata, combined with the forensic accounting, could provide powerful circumstantial evidence of illicit activity, enough to potentially interest federal authorities. Simultaneously, the PIs tracking Langley reported he was making arrangements for international travel, booking a flight to Switzerland, a notorious banking haven, under an assumed name. He was preparing his escape route. They also learned, through cultivating a source within the dealership's remaining staff, that Langley had scheduled a large, unusual shipment of auto parts to be picked up by a private logistics company late the next evening, a shipment far too large and scheduled too irregularly to be legitimate business. Vivian suspected this wasn't parts, but perhaps cash, documents, or other illicit materials being moved out before Langley fled. This was their critical juncture. They had strong circumstantial evidence, an affidavit from one employee, and intelligence suggesting Langley was about to flee and move crucial materials. It might not be enough for an immediate arrest warrant based solely on financial crime, which often required lengthy investigation. Waiting longer risked Langley escaping justice entirely. Vivian faced her dark night of the soul. Decades ago, the network she investigated had slipped away, and Robert was lost. Now, a key player, potentially linked to that same dark world, was about to disappear again. The thought was unbearable. She conferred urgently with Daniel and Eleanor. They needed to force the authorities' hand now. The decision was made. They would leak a carefully curated package of information, the corroborated affidavit from the fired employee, the forensic accountant's report detailing the suspicious offshore transactions, the cyber team's metadata analysis showing communication patterns with flag servers, and the PI report on Langley's imminent flight risk and a suspicious shipment directly to a high-ranking contact Eleanor had at the Department of Justice Task Force specializing in transnational organized crime. It was a gamble. Leaking partial evidence could backfire. But it was their only chance to prompt immediate action. Final preparations involved ensuring the informant employee was secure, coordinating surveillance teams to track Langley and the auto parts shipment in real time, and preparing Daniel and Vivian for potential fallout or retaliation once the information was leaked. Vivian felt the familiar weight of high-stakes intelligence work settle over her, the quiet teacher receding as the seasoned analyst took control one last time. The leak was made through secure channels. Now, all they could do was wait and watch Langley's every move. The DOJ contact, recognizing the credibility of the source and the alarming indicators in the leaked package, acted swiftly. Within hours, leveraging the detailed financial tracing and the imminent flight risk, federal agents secured emergency warrants. The climax unfolded with calculated precision. One FBI team intercepted Edward Langley at the private airfield outside Atlanta, arresting him on the tarmac moments before he could board his flight to Switzerland. They cited charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering based on the evidence provided. Langley, stripped of his arrogance, was stunned into compliance. Simultaneously, another federal team, coordinating with local police, converged on the private logistics company's warehouse just as the suspicious auto parts shipment from Langley's dealership was being loaded. Inside the crates, they found not auto parts, but millions of dollars in undeclared cash and encrypted hard drives containing detailed records of Langley's money laundering operation, directly linking him to the international network and providing the irrefutable proof needed for conviction. Agents also raided the dealership, seizing computers and records, effectively shutting down Langley's operation. The takedown was swift, clean, and based entirely on the intelligence meticulously gathered and strategically deployed by Vivian, Daniel, and their team. The aftermath was significant, but handled with discretion. Edward Langley, facing overwhelming evidence, eventually pleaded guilty to numerous federal charges, receiving a lengthy prison sentence. The investigation expanded, using the seized hard drives to target other nodes in the international network, achieving breakthroughs Vivian could only have dreamed of decades ago. While no direct, provable link to Robert Harris's specific disappearance emerged, the dismantling of this network branch brought Vivian a profound, if somber, sense of closure. Daniel ensured the cooperating employee received protection and assistance. The story broke in the financial press: Langley's arrest, the seizure of the dealership, the exposure of a major money laundering ring, but Vivian's and Daniel's role remained behind the scenes, attributed only to information provided to federal authorities. With the threat neutralized, Daniel and Vivian had a long, quiet conversation. She shared more details about her past, the risks, the reasons for her secrecy. He expressed his immense pride and love, assuring her he finally understood. Their bond deepened, transforming from mother-son affection into a partnership built on mutual respect and shared history. True to his word, Daniel eventually acquired the forfeited dealership property. He demolished the monument to Langley's greed and, in its place, funded the construction and endowment of the Vivian Harris Center for Youth Empowerment, focusing on tech skills, financial literacy, and entrepreneurship for underprivileged Atlanta youth. Vivian, though preferring her quiet life, agreed to serve as a guiding consultant, her wisdom invaluable. Daniel also established the Sapphire Legacy Foundation, the name a private acknowledgement of Vivian's past operational work dedicated to supporting victims of international financial crime and funding investigative journalism focused on illicit networks. Vivian continued her volunteer work and gardening, but with a renewed sense of peace. She had faced the ghosts of her past, protected her family, and helped bring down a dangerous criminal. Daniel, profoundly changed, channeled his resources into philanthropy with greater purpose. Occasionally, he'd find his mother in her garden, and they'd talk for hours, no longer just mother and son, but two remarkable individuals who, brought together by an act of prejudice, had found justice and a deeper connection.